Welcome to Windows on the World, and this week we are actually available, or going to be available, on SoundCloud and Tumblr, for what that's worth. I should have hooked that up before, but I've made sure that we've made use of every possible outlet on the Spreaker platform, and if you haven't subscribed to us on Spreaker, please do, because we need more subscribers on there. We have many thousands on YouTube, but not too many on Spreaker, and we don't know how long we're going to be on YouTube for, although we've survived so far, and we haven't had too many strikes of late. We've had a couple for things in the past. But getting on to tonight's show, the title of which is Protest, Propaganda and Pantomime. So this week we're going to talk about what's behind the distractions, and even the distractions themselves, as they are part of the global pantomime. The big society's come of age and is now the totalitarian police state, run through political correctness and enforced by its legions of useful idiots with their empowered, non-existent minorities and divide and rule monotony. Now that's quite a mouthful, but it kind of sums up a lot of the shows that we've been doing over the past few years. And it's getting to the point now, it's difficult to find new and catchy titles because we have to keep it within the paradigm of what we're talking about. And the paradigm, or the framework of what we're talking about, is increasingly getting more narrow. So the Big Society, remember that, the Big Society, Cameron's Big Society came out in 2010. We've talked about this a lot because the reason a lot of the things have happened within the so-called society we're in is because of the introduction of the Big Society, which has come of age and is now the totalitarian police state run by political correctness and enforced by its legion of useful idiots. So the agents of change are everywhere, in every department of every administration of every public service, and represented by your useless MPs and held up by the trivially obsessed fake news outlets, that is. Yes, our subversion is nearly complete, but not quite, because we're still here. The plan is flawed and repetitive, as we've been finding out over the past few weeks and indeed months and actually years, and calling out and foiling the subversives who wish to undermine what you would have previously taken for granted. It's very important. And of course, this all comes down to the narrowing corridor of opinion and political correctness. Ad hominems and petty-minded sniping cannot cover up the fact that the fake reality being imposed not only has no clothes, but is more transparent and desperate than Tony Blair's press releases. And yes, it's incredible, isn't it, that even after all that he's done, he's still presented in the media and he's still got jobs. I'm here with Piers Cotbyn tonight, and we're going to be joined by Sandi Adams. We've got two shows for you, actually. Little digression here. We're going to be talking about the gender agenda in part 2 of this show, which is going to be a separate stream and a separate show. But let's get back to this. The spell can easily be broken once you renounce the need to comply with the politically correct Stasi and Politburo, whom your elected government employ to disempower you and remove all your rights. That sounds like quite a grandstanding statement, but it's true, and ties in exactly to what we're going to be talking about in the next two shows, which are both tonight. So all this is obviously included in the Human Rights Act, which removes inalienable rights. We've talked about that, and that's going to be very important because, first of all, I want to get onto a great article by our regular contributor and friend Francis Leader, and it's on steamit.com/new@francisleader. Now, this is very important and goes into the bigger picture that we talk about quite regularly on the show. Let me just quote from her article. Given that on the 10th of December 2018, world leaders gather in Marrakesh, Morocco, and will sign the UN Migration Compact, we can consider the old concept of nationhood to be approaching its demise. Now also check out UN replacement migration, and things will start to fall into place if they haven't already. Getting back to her article, She states the compact presages the imposition of a borderless world in which migration is a human right. Again, check out our show, The Fourth World, where the Fourth World wilderness is talked about. And Edmund de Rothschild suggests spraying dry ice in the North Pole to combat global warming. So the one world global totalitarian system relies on the policies and religion of climate catastrophophobia. This is my aside here, by the way, not Francis's article. An interesting aside is the opposite to the catastrophist theory, uniformitarianism. I've been reading about this recently, and this is a really interesting point because it ties into the belief that the climate and everything that happened on Earth is just plodding on and has done normally since the beginning of time. Well, this obviously isn't the case when we look at the facts which have been presented to us. A bit like Darwinism versus creationism. The catastrophists, though, now have the upper hand with the science. It's really interesting stuff because the last two shows we did, which were all about the sort of proposed intervention theory, which was proposed by people like Lloyd Pye, in other words, that there'd been some intervention in the human evolutionary chain, if you like to put it that way, even though there's no evidence that we evolved. So this uniformitarianism is the opposite of catastrophism, and this was used to undermine things that were in the Bible. Now, the Bible's a selection of stories, some of which may be based on fact. And what we've found is that since people like Immanuel Velikovsky, who wrote Worlds in Collision, which was about possible collision of Venus with Jupiter to create the asteroid belt and putting Venus into a totally different position in the sky, etc. Some of his theories have now been accepted in conventional science, i.e. the heat of Jupiter, the heat of the surface of Jupiter, etc. Look into that if you haven't. Immanuel Velikovsky, most of our listeners will actually be aware of that, but that's just one example. But just think how uncomfortable that is for those who are state-funded and have to accept that their reality is not how the universe works. Now, bureaucracy hates sudden change. Now, this is a very big part of what we're talking about as well, because bureaucracy hates change, and people within bureaucracy and within academia also hate change, which is probably why they denied catastrophophobia for such a long time. And I'm sure Piers is going to have something to say about that, because he's been doing some talks recently. Yes. What do you think about the theory of catastrophism?
Well, I think it is very significant that changes over long periods of time have always involved catastrophes. I mean, that's what the data shows. I mean, planetary collisions are just one thing, but in terms of climate, for example, there are quite abrupt changes, which happen quite quickly, and some of these are to do with solar activity. In fact, most of them are, which can change rapidly, and others are connected with meteorite collisions.
Cometary catastrophophobia, that's a really interesting thing and something that I've been looking into for years. However, let's get back to Francis's article.
Yeah.
This development, she says, makes a total mockery of any idea of secession from any globalist structure for all nations on Earth. In other words, one world government and no nation state. What we are seeing is a clear indication that the United Nations is the major driving force behind globalism. Now, this is something we do talk about all the time, so you could say, okay, that's part of our echo chamber. Well, it's not in a way, because if you look at the stuff that we put out, it all makes sense from global to local, and that's one of the big points of our talks and one of the points of the shows that we try and get over. She carries on, I am aware, and I have been writing about it for years, that the United Nations accepted worldview has dispensed with the idea of nations entirely. Exactly. It now views the world in a simplistic binary fashion. There are only two regions. Now wait for it. The core and the gap. So get that, the core and the gap are the only two regions in the world according to the UN Global Action Plan. If you live in the gap, you have two choices, die or migrate. If you live in the core, you have no choices, accept immigration, poverty, compacted living and debt. Now this is very important. What happens when there are more people? I was listening to a lecture today by the honorary Freemason, Manly P. Hall, who people state, he's a 33rd degree Freemason. Well, he was actually gifted the position of being a 33 degree Freemason because of his knowledge. And if you listen to his talks on YouTube, they are fascinating. That man had a brilliant mind. So whether they made him a Freemason or not, well worth listening to. And of course, if you want a bit of knowledge, read The Secret Teachings of All Ages. It might take you a few months though. So if you live in the gap, you have two choices, die or migrate. If you live in the core, you have no choices, accept migrants, poverty, compacted living and debt. So this is getting down to the core of what this is all about. So what happens when there are more people? Very good point. This is something Manly P. Hall said in one of his lectures. He said, living standards will fall, there will be scarcity, rationing and mass surveillance. Well, I put the mass surveillance and the rationing in, but that's what he was saying. I'm paraphrasing it, bringing it up to date. But he was saying that the result of overpopulation is that everybody has less. And by that, we are talking about rationing. The UN Global Action Plan is to make it seem as though there are too many people, so we all get less. That's the plan. So it's actually a complete fake, but brought about by driving everyone into cities by 2050, which is their plan. The research which the article refers to is also available on steamit.com news. Francis Leader, War and No Peace in the 21st Century. She carries on with this article. Therefore, humanity is being rearranged deliberately. Whole communities are displaced or destroyed. Now, we've covered that globally. It's exactly what myself and Piers have been talking about for the last 2 years on the shows. So the whole social cleansing agenda and displacement is part of this. Let's go on with the article. The countries that are wealthy now will be impoverished as they stretch their services to absorb massive immigration. With Agendas 21 and 30, the United Nations has created a utopian dream to convince us all that we can reshape humanity into one homogenized blob within which everyone will be equal and all will be at peace. Now, this is an interesting thing because peace is going to be enforced. It's not just going to happen. Now, this is the mindset of those who wish to remain in the EU. The EU is just an arm of the stateless global governance which removes all rights and imposes poverty for all by mass migration and using political pantomime to create divide and rule solutions. It's the totalitarian police state patrolled by newspeak and political correctness plus mass neurosis imposed on a population through brainwashing. That was my paragraph, by the way. She carries on, the United Nations, in its drive towards reshaping humanity, is creating hell on earth. Whether you live in the core or the gap, the future is horribly bleak, despite the sugary positivity of the 17 goals of sustainability, which is the Agenda 2030 objectives. You can read those online. Now, when they state nobody will be left behind, insinuating that equality in rights, education, healthcare and economic stability will be evenly applied, what they are actually intending to create is a global citizenship which eliminates culture, religions, ownership and national identities, even discourages diverse languages. Freedom of movement will be limited to the human habitation zones and the rewilded regions will be off limits and protected from humanity, if they even exist at all. There is greater evidence to suggest that the gap will be stripped of all life and exploited for minerals and energy resources. Now, this is interesting because people have two views on the way this information is presented. Some people think that the way I present the evidence is very negative, but all I'm doing is presenting the evidence given the facts which are put in front of me. I have very positive outcomes from the things that I do within this, in that I've taken councils to court, I've had these sort of surveillance websites taken down. You can see our shows on there. Council spy program backfires when I had the Grime Busters site taken down, which was trying to identify citizens as criminals, which they're not allowed to do. But all this is part of it. It's all part of this massive surveillance. And that really is all about administration. And administration, as we've just stated, relies on uniformitarianism, which means that they don't like change. So by all means, interrupt them and be the change that you want to see. So that's something that we've been covering and will continue to cover, as it is the most important and also interesting thing to talk about. Everything else is just trivia in comparison, which is why these subjects are not covered in the fake news media. Now let's get on to the yellow vests. People have been talking about them tonight. These are the people. They genuinely are the people. However, what's been portrayed to the press now are the agent provocateurs who've been smashing some windows and the troublemakers who are put in either by the state or interested lobby groups. And it's exactly the same here, and we're going to cover that in the next part of the show. So the yellow vest protest in France has been hijacked by state thugs. Check that out. All those people in plain clothes with batons who were following the police and being protected by the police to go in and take people out. And of course other interested terrorists, and that's what we're going to be talking about tonight as well, to demonise the public. So it's the same show, different country, and that's happening right now in the UK. The Brexit betrayal by the state, as it introduces Tommy the fraudster, 4 names, Tommy Robinson, the fraudster, 4 names, Yaxley Lennon, who's been bought by lobbyists to undermine the will of the British public, creating fake far-right MI5 instigated propaganda. And if you think that's a conspiracy theory, listen to what Mark Rowley said, head of MI5, before he resigned. That's exactly what he did say. So, I think that was Sandi in the background there. She's probably signalling to us that everything's okay in her part of the country, in case anybody wondered. So here is the latest MI5 press release, aka Hope Not Hate, a charity we've covered on this show. Now, this was brought to my attention indirectly by Martin, one of our listeners today, who basically got called a paedophile for putting something on their Twitter feed which was factual and one of our shows. This is the sort of subversion that you expect from people who follow these kind of groups, because they're following an MI5 intelligence services narrative, which is all about ad hominem and undermining of the opposition. So yeah, we've done many shows on this actually. So Hope Not Hate, yes, a charity. They appear to have links to Antifa, and the reason I say that is because when there was a talk in central London about the death of Princess Diana, a load of Antifa people turned up because Hope Not Hate had put it on their website. So how can a charity be attracting a terrorist group? Very interesting. So, look at the article which features all the shows at Windows on the World. Windows on the World, go to windowsontheworld.net, Domestic Terrorism, Hope Not Hate. Have a look at that one. There's 3 different shows there, all about the way that this charity operates. And the reason I'm bringing it up is, well, you'll find out as we go along. Here is their latest ideological subversion piece. This is what I've found on their website after talking to Martin. It says, this Sunday, the capital will endure the Brexit betrayal march. So the capital is enduring it, is it? So even London itself is protesting about people turning up with Union Jacks in central London. Okay, that's according to Hope Not Hate. They say the Brexit betrayal march, a far-right demonstration. Wait a minute, why is the Brexit betrayal march a far-right demonstration? That's absolute misrepresentation coming from a charity. Maybe people might want to complain to the Charity Commission about that. Spearheaded by Islamophobic extremist and serial criminal, okay, I agree with that bit, Stephen Yaxley, 4 names fraudster Lennon, aka Tommy Robinson, and UKIP's anti-Muslim leader Gerard Batten. Now, they're immediately using the MI5 narrative that people who voted Brexit are far right. How tiresome. Actually, it was hijacked by the fake far right and the puppet masters. So MI5 Yaxley Lennon works for the same side as Hope Not Hate. That's the ironic thing. So Yaxley Lennon, the extreme far right, is actually employed by the same lobbyists that are paying for hope not hate. So fake far right, fake far left is a form of synthesis of political correct totalitarian police state promoted by the NGOs, think tanks like Demos, and all those getting their propaganda from change agents of the state and MI5. So the threat of the far right is actually the threat of the democratic process being observed. So they're saying that people who voted are far right. Well, no, they're not. They just wanted to leave Europe. So you can see where that one's coming from. This stuff gets extremely tiresome. So the threat of the far right is actually the threat of the democratic process. That's been made clear with what they're saying here. And the global, local, UN agenda being undermined by a vote. So the event, which will kick off at the Dorchester Hotel, it carries on at 11:45 and move to Whitehall for the main rally at 1 o'clock, signals the ever closer relationship between UKIP and Lenin. In a recent video, Lenin stated that if we pull off Sunday, you will see the launch and the momentum will build for a revolution, populist party and political movement in this country, all funded by his backers. And we know who they are. Again, same side, different panto dame. As with previous demonstrations this year, activists, this is their article, carries on, activists from across the British far right, representing a diverse range of organisations, including Generation Identity. Well, they don't actually. They don't represent anybody. They represent people who go on the march who wanted to leave Europe. So they're now saying that they are aligned to political groups. Well, they're not. Political groups may well be aligned to them for their own lobbying interests, but that has nothing to do with the way the people voted. So this is classic subversion that they're using. Disgusting organisation, in my opinion. And I've written quite a lot about them and done many shows on them. The march has proved enormously controversial within UKIP. Well, I think it has, that's absolutely right. Prompting a number of high-profile resignations, with former leader Nigel Farage, who Hope Not Hate were going to sue, but they were trying to get the public to give them money to do it. Until Farage said, OK, I apologise, I can't be asked. That even the event is the most ill-judged political event I have ever been aware of in British politics. Well, he's actually right, because the lobbyists who are backing Nigel Farage have nothing to do with this country. The very idea of Tommy Robinson being at the centre of the Brexit debate is too awful to contemplate. Well, I agree with him entirely. The ideological subversion party runs all sides. So I'm going to bring Piers in here to chat about this. I've been talking for quite a lot there with that introduction. What do you make of it all?
Well, I think you're right that there's a lot of things behind everything that goes on. And, you know, I think you're absolutely correct that MI5 and so forth are promoting, you know, a fake right and fake left, if you like. More interesting thing is perhaps the people who go on these marches, because quite a lot of just Brexit people would probably go on this Tommy Robinson type of thing, and when they're there they find they're being sort of corralled into a certain political agenda that they hadn't considered, you know, and the same happens on the other side. I was at a big housing summit meeting on Saturday where, you know, the appalling state of social cleansing all over the country in almost identical form was revealed, and at that meeting a number of people were promoting coming on the anti march against Tommy Robinson et al, which was fine, because the people who wanted to go was just saying, look, we don't like racism. Okay, but at the same time I noticed one of the promoters sort of alluded very much to Remainism, or he was, the way he implied everything, it was that the other side from him, i.e. the Brexit lot, were, as you said, possibly implicitly racist, and therefore Remain was good, you see. Now, of course, this is complete utter poppycock, because Remain is just making us prisoners of the European Union and Wall Street supergiant corporations. But the point I'd make is that within the background which is being manipulated, there are plenty of people who have genuine views. Just being anti-racist is nothing wrong with that at all. In fact, that's a good thing. So, but they will get manipulated into a certain framework, and of course, there is a kind of ideology around, as you well know, the raft of ideology we describe is that the European Union is inherently good, and man-made climate change is real, and that Donald Trump is evil. And if you deny one of these things, you're attacked and accused of denying the other two.
I think once you identify this stuff, it gets incredibly easy to see what's going on.
It does,
and it's a great thing to do. There are people who've been trying to point this out, but there's a huge number of people who think Tommy Robinson is actually Tommy Robinson rather than Tommy the Fraudster Fournames.
Well, that's right.
And also who he's backed by. Because it's okay if you are playing a straight kind of game, but he's not. He's just a chancer who's been used by the fake alt-right. And what I found incredible was that when the stream went live today, the prominent flag being displayed was the Israeli flag, which I couldn't really understand because I didn't realise that
What's that got to do with Brexit?
Well, exactly, but I think maybe Israel want to come out of the European Union because they've already won the Eurovision Song Contest, so they don't really need to be in it anymore, do they?
Okay.
I know that was something that's very striking, and of course, Tommy's being funded by people who have an interest in Israel, a huge interest in Israel, like rebel media. So basically he's funded by Zionist groups. I know we're not allowed to talk about it. I know the narrow corridor of opinion doesn't allow this thing to happen, but it's a fact. So I just thought that was a really important thing as to why was the Russia Today Ruptly feed zooming in on an Israeli flag, then zooming out again. And when you see the crowd, there's a few tiny little Union Jacks and one big Israel flag in the middle.
That's really bizarre.
Well, I think it's just interested parties.
Well, one of the things about the Tommy Robinson appearance is, of course, he's described by others as a fascist or fascistic. Now, he is, no doubt about it. However, you see, at the same time, he supports Israel. So that makes this label...
Well, I think Israel supports him.
Well, yes, this label difficult to stick with. To me, he's all the bad things you describe. And the opposition to him is generally well-meaning, but it really pisses me off when the opposition to him sort of imply Remain equals good. Because Tommy Robinson's bad. I mean, that is just complete nonsense. But like all the things they put forward, they're full of non sequiturs and flag symbolism all the time. Like if you don't agree with something, then you're bad, and if you agree with something else,
I'm going to put something
even
to
more
you now.
bad.
Yeah. Do you think if this situation was in France and Tommy Robinson appeared as the bastion of the British people or French people, so if he turned up, say his name was Pierre Robinson or whatever, right? Yeah. So he turns up in France, or Lafayette, Tommy Lafayette, right? Yeah. So if he turns up in France and he starts to try and co-opt, say, the yellow vests into an openly nationalist position, do you think they would have put up with it?
No, not at all. Not at all. Yeah. You see, of course, there is people in Britain trying to describe the yellow vests as far right, which of course is completely insane.
Well, they're trying to demonise them as that as well, obviously. I mean, by people... I saw an example of this today. There was a shot of a guy holding a flare, and I thought, well, nobody would really be doing that. He obviously wanted the camera on him as though he was going to throw it, you see. So these are the agent provocateurs, and once you know how this stuff works, it is a pantomime, which is why I alluded to that in the title of tonight's show.
Yeah, people will be sent in to wave flares around. Yeah. But when we were giving out leaflets on the Extinction Rebellion events, we did have some conversations where, the question of yellow vests came up, and I said, that's great stuff. And then this guy who was obviously sort of a manipulator or organiser of the people, not a large number of people there, but the people on the Extinction Rebellion thing. He said, "Oh yes, Yellow Vest, that's just a far-right operation. It's controlled by fascists and bad people, and it's very far-right." So you see, I mean, that is untrue, of course. It's a spontaneous eruption against reductions in living standards, starting off with fuel costs. But you see, this does reinforce what we said about the origin of the Extinction Rebellion. Namely, they are here to control. And,
yes, of course.
And something like that, the statement like that, is deliberately to try and weaken the real opposition to the reductions in living standards being put about directly from Agenda 21.
Well, exactly. Lie down in the road, everything will be all right, nothing to see here. We did report on this several weeks ago, and since then a lot more information has come in through people around the country. And it is quite interesting in the respect that it's a cuckoo that takes over other movements. It has no real aims. It doesn't make sense because the people who are being led by them don't even know why they're there, because it's all about this special report that came out of the IPCC, which gets mentioned on their websites, but none of them actually refer to.
Well, there's nothing in it which
they couldn't
do anything.
No,
I mean, it's an unscientific. Well, it's posed as a scientific thing, but it's a word salad of scientific jargon to make it look as if there's something behind it all. But the fact is, there's no evidence.
Well, I don't know anyone who's read it who's part of this Extinction Rebellion thing. I asked a few people, but also it's saying we've got 12 years to save the world. I mean, this is so entitled and selfish of these people. It's the uniformitarianism thing again, because basically, because their lives have gone along in a nice little orderly flow, they think that the world does it as well. You see,
but do
and
they
think that we've done it to the world. Well, if you look at climate and weather systems and the absolutely traumatic things that have happened on this planet, then you'll realise that it's not stable. The effect that we have on the environment, and I think people would argue against what we're saying, is so minimal. They've been told that it's very important. I mean, but I think this does it all for me. When you've got Attenborough actually addressing the UN, I mean, he's a voiceover artist, right?
Yeah,
he poses in front of a camera and he used to stroke koala bears and things like that and go into caves where there was bats in the 70s. Now, what does he know about the climate change? What does he know about the weather systems? He doesn't know anything, does he?
Well, he doesn't.
Or does he? I don't know.
Well, some years ago he appeared in the St Paul's Cathedral addressing the crowd as to the dangers of climate change and so forth. And I went up to him and I said, well, look, unfortunately, the science has moved on from what you say. And I gave him some documents which he promised to read. He obviously didn't read them because he carried on stating complete nonsense. Now, as you know, we did have a press conference this Friday where we, Weather Action, along with people from Electric Universe, discussed what was going on specifically, starting around Sir David Attenborough. And I was filmed, and it's on weatheraction.com and will be soon on Windows on the World. I made a number of points, but one of the most significant things I think we pointed out was that first of all, there's no evidence that carbon dioxide controls climate. It's the other way round. Carbon dioxide levels are controlled by climate. And I put the point that there was another David around, David Bellamy, who was a superb naturalist, as is Sir David Attenborough. Now, David Bellamy pointed out on the BBC that the man-made climate change theory was complete nonsense. He pointed this out some years ago, and he immediately lost his job and all posts that he had of any significance around the country. And I said at the press conference that I think if this had not happened to David Bellamy, it's unlikely that Sir David Attenborough would be spouting this utter nonsense coming out of the United Nations Agenda 21, working for the interests of big corporations and big oil that get profit increases by prices going up in the name of carbon tax and carbon policies and so forth.
Well, yeah, he's part of the elite in a way, isn't he? I mean, that's
Yeah.
the thing. They're part of this elite structure of fake news, which is what they're now just promoting all the time. I mean, I don't think these people should have a political voice, and I'll tell you why, because they're politically not up to speed. But then again, I'm being an idealist here. I'm thinking that everyone should do 25 years of research before they start talking. You know,
I mean, he's neither politically nor scientifically up to speed. Well, he's an expert on nature and so forth. If I was to point out to him that the first and second laws of thermodynamics are completely negated by the CO2 theory, he may or may not understand. But they are. However, you don't need to be a physicist to see that the man-made climate change theory is nonsense, because the actual data shows that carbon dioxide levels follow temperatures, not lead them. And for listeners, I would say, as a new way we've got of summarising the essential points on climate change. And we've boiled it down to just two things, which if you're listening you should remember. One, carbon dioxide levels are an effect, not a cause, of changing climate. Okay, you've heard that one before. Number two, climate policy is not to control climate, which is impossible. It is to control you. And you can see how it works in the workings of Agenda 21, and sustainability ideology is used everywhere to justify basically anything they want to do, which always means, despite the fact they say this is going to get to redistribution of wealth, their so-called redistribution of wealth is not trickle down, it is trickle up. That is what they're doing, is trickling up, or in fact more like shoveling up, because the super rich are getting richer and richer at a very rapid rate, and the great mass of the world population, the 99.9%, is getting poorer. And another point which came up was the issue of ideology, because as I said, it would be, if we were just talking about neutrino mass or something, that the BBC wouldn't care. We wouldn't be denounced for being neutrino mass deniers or anything. But the ideological weight of what we're saying about the fakery of the man-made climate change story is so crucial. They have to denounce it. And to understand this, flashback to Galileo. Galileo made the point, observations appeared to show that the simplest way to understand what we see in the sky is to say that the planets go around the sun. And, well, okay, what's wrong with that? Fair thing to say. Well, the point was, which is wrong with that, was that this undermined the whole ideological basis of the Catholic Church, namely that the earth is the centre of the universe and the Catholic Church are the connection to God. So you had better listen to them. And then this guy comes along and says, hang on, that narrative is false. It's untrue. So they couldn't take it because of the ideological implications. And that is exactly the same with the man-made climate change theory. They can't take the exposure of it because of its ideological implications. Now, we sent off our letters to the IPCC, Sir David Attenborough, the BBC and Al Gore, asking them to produce evidence of their theory, proper peer-reviewed data evidence, by or on December the 14th, which is the last day of the COP. That's the COP24 in Poland, which is that jamboree they're having there, where they're hoping to produce more brainwashed people to go and harass governments all over the world to impose these stupid policies. However, they're getting seriously upset there because the yellow vests have sort of issued a certain warning to them, and yellow vest type actions have now already spread into the Netherlands and to Belgium, where some attempts were made at Parliament buildings there. So I think the globalists are having a problem.
Well, they might have to get rid of Macron, which is probably going to disappoint them, because Rothschild must have spent a fortune grooming him, you know. I mean, what a waste of money. Just didn't deliver at all in the end. I mean, they need a different type of change agent. But we're going to get on now to a subject which you are often asked about, and we do talk about it, but not in a great way, because it's a very difficult thing to actually nail down. The first show I ever did was about what's known as chemtrails. That was the first show at the People's Voice TV. Now, several years down the line, I'm still have no actual overall opinion as to how and why it's done. There are several different reasons. One of them is obviously to do with the idea of climate change and to bring in a bit of dimming of the sun. There's different uses of it, and if you talk to people in the military, they'll tell you there are different uses for these technologies. Now, there is a consensus amongst a lot of people that it is going on, and I do believe it is. I do believe weather modification plans are going on, even though it's stated that they're meant to be experimental. However, I just want to run this by you, Piers. This is an article which is extremely interesting.
Okay.
A fleet of aircraft injecting sulfates into the lower stratosphere could help protect the world from climate change. You see, this is how it all fits together.
Yeah.
Well, that is according to a peer-reviewed paper published November 23rd in the Journal of Environmental Research. So the letters by researchers from Harvard and Yale universities. Now, just to interrupt here before we go on, I was at a meeting several years ago, Oxford University, with David Keith, several UN IPCC people, and they were talking about spraying sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere to cause global dimming, in other words, to combat climate change. And they were very, very serious about it. So carrying on, Gernot Wagner, a research associate at Harvard School of Engineering and Applied Sciences, is the lead author of the paper. He said their study shows this type of geoengineering would be technically possible strictly from an engineering perspective. It would also be remarkably inexpensive, at an average of around 2 to 2.5 billion per year over the first 15 years. An absolute bargain, that, isn't it? I mean, get on with it, you know. The study's co-author of the paper and lecturer at Yale, Wake Smith, explained that an entirely new aircraft needs to be designed for the chemtrail program. Now, this is going to cause a bit of controversy amongst some people who listen to the show, because they believe that these aircrafts already exist. Now, there have been photographs circulated, and we've got no idea of their validity, whether these things have been put together, and whether they're just normal spraying planes. They could be planes spraying all sorts of things. This is the incredibly confusing thing about it, because lots of things are thrown into the arena as far as weather modification goes and aerosol, stratospheric aerosol spraying. So it says researchers investigated what it would cost to develop it, the aircraft they call the SAI Lofter, which is SAIL Sail. The report indicates the fuselage would have a stubby design, and the wing area as well as the thrust would need to be twice as large. The estimated cost of the plane, a whopping $2 billion and $350 million to modify existing engines. Now, there's a few things going on here. What if they're going to use that for black budget stuff, right? For illegal or undercover, operations, and just say that they're spending it on this? Because no one's really going to know, because everyone thinks it's happening. There's so many things going on here. And without real whistleblowers, this is an incredibly hard thing to do. And I only like to put out facts. Now, I was in touch, and I still am, with Max Bliss, who was looking into this for years, and he had loads of documentation, and we looked at it. And I was working with people who were very high up within this. And we met one of them last year at one of the shows we did in the Sunrise Festival down near Hereford. And these people are still sort of beavering away with it. But it's kind of reached a point where the thing is difficult now because, as I say, there's lots of different agendas going on here. So, Piers, give your opinion on this.
Well, there are a lot of agendas going on. I think the key thing to understand is that the climate change lobby has a lot of following in terms of a gravy train, and it's worth billions. So anyone involved in the climate change gravy train will agree or ask to be included in anything involving spending money to save the planet, so-called. Now, that's why they'll join into this, whether they believe it or not. They'll say it's technically feasible and so forth. As to whether it could work, well, the first problem is the world is actually cooling, so they're under a complete delusion anyway that the heating is either going to happen or dangerous and needs to be dealt with. But that won't stop them wasting your money, which is what they want to do. It's interesting they go on about new types of aeroplane and so forth, because obviously the military would be interested in anything new that can do anything new in the name of whatever they want to do. Because if these things are being used to spray so-called whatever to sulfates to save the planet, they could also be used for something else. I mean, as in the Vietnam War, we had Agent Orange and so forth was sprayed all over Vietnam by American planes. So who knows what else is behind this, but I would suggest the military are very much behind it, and they could be using this stuff as a cover for developing other things. I would describe the scientists who go down this route as totally evil Dr. Strangelove characters, and frankly they shouldn't be allowed to receive a penny of state funding on anything, and I don't believe we should be trying to modify any weather whatsoever.
No, I agree with that, and having seen these people in action and the way that they react, they are removed from reality, in my opinion. When I've actually seen the way they react in front of audiences, and they have no awareness, but then again, they are part of this kind of academic hierarchical system, so they don't really have to know about reality. But getting back to this, I mean, if you think about the largest passenger plane, I think it's the Airbus, and think of the weight that can carry. So I don't quite know what they're saying here, because they're talking about transporting around something that's quite light, really. Oh, it's in big containers, but it's not. It doesn't weigh as much as.
I agree with that.
That doesn't make sense to me.
It's just a spraying thing. I mean, when they spray crops, you don't have a gigantic plane. You have a little plane.
Well, they used to use biplanes, didn't they?
Which fly low. So now these need to be high because they want to, put enough sulfate around of small particles which will fall slowly and therefore block out sunlight and so forth for a long time. But it doesn't need to be a gigantic aeroplane. You could have a smaller one that goes up more often, as far as I can see.
So the whole thing could be another psychological operation, or whatever you want to call it, or a distraction issue. And again, we're never going to get to the bottom of it.
Have we got any pictures of this so-called new plane?
No, they're talking about how they're going to invent it, So,
invent it? So it hasn't been invented?
No. But people, again, will say, well, I've seen pictures of the spraying planes. Well, you've seen pictures, and there are planes with tanks inside. It doesn't mean that they're actually spraying chemtrails. This is the problem I have with it all, is that people jump on something, and then, because you don't believe them, because they've seen a photograph, they start attacking you. This is the whole paradigm of what we talk about a lot of the time, is that the way people are co-opted into things. I mean, I did a lot of research into all this stuff, and I found it's very commercial. Obviously, there's a huge commercial arm to it. You can pay to have rain if you want it. Cloud seeding, it's been done for ages. I mean, I've spoken to people who were in the RAF and talk about this stuff. They do know that this weather modification stuff is happening, and it's happened in different countries. It depends on the agenda and who's doing it and all the rest of it. However,
that's different from the systematic sulfate spreading to cause cooling, they hope, reflecting sunlight.
However, it's a totally different issue, and we should probably get back to what we were talking about. And I think I've got some quite good news here, and it was about the Guardian newspaper. A very interesting article, actually, and it was all about that they'd been completely hoodwinked with a lot of the stuff they put out about Assange. In actual fact, it's fake news, which is completely undermined them. It says Fernando Villavicencio, a prominent Ecuadorian political activist and journalist and director of USAID-funded NGO Fund Medicos, an editor of online publication Focus Ecuador, right? Now, this is the person that they're talking about. Most readers are also aware of The Guardian's recent publication of claims that Julian Assange met with former Trump campaigner Paul Manafort on 3 occasions. This has now been definitively debunked by Fidel Navarez, the former consul at Ecuador's London embassy between 2010 and 18, who says Paul Manafort has never visited the embassy during the time he was in charge there. But this was hardly the first time the outlet published a dishonest smear authored by Luke Harding against Assange. The paper is also no stranger to publicising stories based on fabricated documents. In May, Disobedient Media, this is the source of this article, reported on the Guardian's hatchet job relating to Operation Hotel, or rather the normal security operations of the embassy under former Ecuadorian President Rafael Correa. The hit piece, co-authored by Harding and Dan Collins, asserted among other things that according to an anonymous source, Assange hacked the embassy's security system. The allegation was promptly refuted by Correa as absurd in an interview with The Intercept, and also by WikiLeaks as an anonymous libel, with which The Guardian had gone too far this time. We're suing. That was said, right? A shared element of The Guardian's Operation Hotel fabrications and the latest libel attempting to link Julian Assange to Paul Manafort is none other than Fernando Villavicencio of Focus Ecuador. In 2014, Villavicencio was caught passing a forged document to The Guardian, which published it without verifying it. When the forgery was revealed, The Guardian hurriedly took the document down, but then tried to cover up that it had been tampered with by Villavicencio when it was reposted a few days later. How is Villavicencio tied to The Guardian's latest smear of Assange? Intimately, it turns out. Who is he? Earlier this year, an independent journalist writing under the pseudonym Jimmy Slammer penned a comprehensive report detailing Villavicencio's relationship with pro-US actors within the Ecuador and US. She sums up her findings, which are in that article on disobedientmedia.com. And the article's titled Guardian's Reputation in Tatters. Now, so basically, alongside the opinion pieces of Owen Jones, The Guardian are putting out proven fake news. So those are 2 reasons to laugh it out of existence, in my opinion. Have you got anything to say about that?
Well, the Manchester Guardian used to be actually a guardian of truth, and I'm interested in how it evolved into this thing where it's been taken over basically by the deep state and Agenda 21 operatives. I mean, it's sad, There's still people who try and work for it or had worked for it that were there for genuine reasons, but more and more it's become dominated by something completely the opposite.
Indeed it has, and we're going to talk in part 2 of this show, which is a separate show. If you're listening to this show, go to the next one on the list, and it's about the transgender agenda. We're going to be talking about that. So also, we still need to hear from people who want to book our talks up and down the country. The bigger picture, you can find that by going to winnersontheworld.net. We've got more booked in for earlier in the new year. Yes,
and I would say look out for the deadlines. The 14th of December, we're waiting for the IPCC and others to respond. Well, they probably won't, but we'll see whatever they're going to say. We're going to have a meeting on the 20th of December. So look out for information on that. And go to windowsontheworld.net and give donations, and come to weatheraction.com, and whole winter now for Britain and Ireland or Europe or the USA at a third off, and the price is going to go up again on Monday evening. So go.
That's very sound advice, Piers, because in order to keep going, we do need a little bit of petrol money. And basically it pays a little bit of the bills. It's very good when people do that. I mean, yes, to do something outside the mainstream, you get no funding whatsoever. In fact, all you get is either subtle or in-your-face abuse. And what keeps us going are the people that we do the talks for and the people who listen to the show, because I would have probably given up on this in the respect of doing it as a weekly show if it wasn't for the amount of people who've started to listen to it, because a lot of the time you can think, is this getting anywhere? And the gratifying thing is that it is. So the amount of research that goes into it is quite broad and deep. And what I want to keep doing is bring in really important stuff that puts things into what we call the bigger picture, because there's not many people who put everything together. And even when we're talking about ancient history, I always tie it into what we're talking about now. And even those shows we did a couple of weeks ago, well, last week actually, all about sort of ancient history and where we were in the process of change which is going on, basically, which goes into a lot of these ancient civilizations, and trying to dig into that, because this stuff is all important, and it's all stuff that they're trying to shut down. I mean, this shutting down of history. I mean, look at like the closing of libraries. I mean, when you think about this is a cultural
gyms, most of them.
Well, it's cultural destruction, isn't it? Really,
yes.
Because the public should have access to libraries, and of course, people read a lot of stuff online now. I actually don't like reading off computer screens. I like books. And books are great. I carry them around everywhere as references, you know. I have books with things underlined in. I write books about books, basically. And this is how you can sort of form a body of information which you've filtered. I think the editing's really important in these shows. That's one of the main things, is that I try and put it simply. I read through an awful lot of stuff, but once you read a lot of this stuff, especially about what's going on with these agendas, it's pretty much all the same direction. It's the only thing that changes are the sound bites, really. And I think that's one of the most important things we do. And of course, pointing out about how it links in with the climate change agenda, which is incredibly important to all this, and one of the most important things. I mean, I do like listening to a lot of what they call alternative media, but what we don't want to do is get into the point where it's an echo chamber. And I really like people sending me stuff from all over the country, and I get sent some really disturbing things. And the mainstream media will not put these things out, because these people have already approached the mainstream with them. Yeah. As long as they've got their lattes and they can go into an office and be part of the kind of system without stepping out of it, people have to do that. They have to earn a living. We don't, or I don't, because I do this. So yes, anything like that is very much appreciated. And we will be back in around 15 minutes. This will be the next show in your list at windowsontheworld.net, the Transgender Agenda with Sandi Adams. So that's been nearly it for this week. I'm just going to get a few words of wisdom before we head for the end of the show.
If you realise how deep the rabbit hole goes, I mean, the people coming out now, even in the entertainment business, saying, I sold my soul to the devil so I could be famous. And you go, Jesus, yeah. And you look at people and you think, how did he get famous? He's crap. You know? And then you think, oh, he must have sold his soul to the devil. Oh, here's Wayne again. He's going to give us all that New World Order crap. And you think, oh, why am I wasting my time even mentioning it? You know, it's only in conversation. And they'd rather talk about football. And, you know, you think, oh, what a waste of space. You know, and it's, oh, Manchester United did this. And you think, what a load of crap. Who cares? You know, who cares about Manchester United and Manchester City? And then you look, you think, this is it. They're just programmed. That's going to be their life. You know, women will watch soaps and men will go to football, and then you'll get up in the morning, you'll go to work and you'll do this, and then you'll finish at 5 if you're lucky. You'll go home, you won't have time for your kids, and you think, but is this what we're born for? You know, just to be slaves, really. You're just slaves.
Join me, Mark Windows, for Windows on the World live every Sunday 9 to 11 p.m. GMT. Check out our archive and programme stream at windowsontheworld.net.
Well, that was Wayne Fontana there. Wayne Fontana, the 60s singer against the New World Order. Have a look at the interview that we did with Wayne. I've got one coming up which he tells you all about his life story. We're going to be putting that out soon. That's about it for this part of the show. We'll see you in 15 minutes if you're here. And if you're not here now, check out the next show on the stream, which is the Transgender Agenda with Sandi Adams.